Hi, I'm Harry. Today we are going to talk about a movie which has been nominated this year in Oscar Award. The film stars the main actor of the movie, The Silence of the Lambs, the actor who won an Oscar for Best Actor, Anthony Hopkins. The film talks about Alzheimer's syndrome, more specifically, the elderly with Alzheimer's, how they deal with their illness and the changes of people around them. Anne came to the apartment to see her old father. The reason was that the caregiver she hired for him had been driven off on the first day of her work. Anthony cheered up and said he was all right. There was no need to make a fuss at all. Anthony lived alone in a big apartment with good conditions. His room looked a little old, but the arrangement was well organized. Anthony told her daughter to let the caregiver go because he suspected she stole his watch. Anne didn't accept that, but Anthony reasoned that he saw the caregiver in the room on purpose. He stood somewhere to see if she stole something. But when Anne asked where he was, he couldn't tell. He wasn't going to cooperate with the caregiver. Anne was helpless. After all, she finally found someone. It wasn't easy to find a suitable caregiver, but Anthony repeated that the caregiver wanted to steal. Anne could just let him go to the bathroom and find it. Anthony came back to the room with the watch stumbled on his wrist. Seeing that her father's memories had become worse, Anne was worried. A long time ago, after her sister died, Anthony was left for her. But it wasn't long until she moved to Paris and lived with her boyfriend. She didn't know what her father could do on his own. If there was no one to take care of him, he could only be sent to a nursing home. After Anne left, Anthony got up and made tea for himself. He suddenly found 2 more plastic bags on the table, but he didn't remember when he bought it. He suddenly heard the door opening. He thought it was his daughter who returned to him, but it turned out to be a stranger. A strange man sat on the couch. Anthony greeted him and asked who the man was in doubt, and why he appeared in his house. The man looked up and said he was his son-in-law. It had been nearly 10 years since he got married to his daughter. And this house wasn't Anthony. It was his. The daughter who entered the house made Anthony more confused. Even though the woman looked familiar, but she didn't look like his daughter at all. She was another person. Is it a bit muddled to understand? Let's pause for an explanation here. Because of Alzheimer's syndrome, Anthony had experienced all the differences in perception and memories. The cognition of the identity of the people around him also had been misplaced. The scene he was seeing now was the point in the future when Anne got married. It was the timeline point to Paris. At that time, Anne had divorced and met her new boyfriend. Anthony accepted these two in silence. The strangers he saw were his daughter and his son-in-law. He sat down and thought about what he missed. Listening to her father's description, Anne comforted him. She said that she'd been divorced for nearly 5 years. In Anthony's misguided memory, the timeline was coming to the point when his daughter was still single. He couldn't believe it. He knew that there were 2 blue bags on the table. Now, where were they? He looked around the room. The bags were nowhere to be found. Time was back at square one. The blue plastic bags were on the table. It was Anne who bought the ingredients to prepare for dinner. She was helping her father find a suitable caregiver. It was obviously not Anthony's house. It was his daughter's house. He was brought to her home to be taken care of. The girl who entered the door was the new caregiver. In Anthony's impression, she looked like his older daughter when she was young. Laura said she loved dancing. Naturally, it brought a new identity to Anthony. He was an engineer before, obviously. But when he introduced himself to Laura, he said he was a dancer. He even danced for her. But when Laura laughed, Anthony suddenly changed his face. The good intention of finding him a caregiver was misinterpreted as to get rid of him and Anne would become the owner. He then left the two looking at each other awkwardly and went back to his room alone. It was Anthony's mood swings and the effect of Alzheimer's syndrome, which made Anne worried. She couldn't find a caregiver to take care of him. She came to his room, looking at her father falling asleep. She immersed in a pressure and asked herself, if one day, when her father fell asleep and she strangled him to death, would it be a relief for both of them? Anne's thoughts were brought back to reality by her husband. Though Laura didn't reach her expectations, she decided to have her come to work the next day just to see Anthony in a serious recession. He couldn't even recognize himself. Anne was depressed. Her husband was getting impatient. Anthony's memories were lost in 3 days or 2. It was driving them crazy. They could only see him like that. Perhaps it was the reason why the couple separated themselves from each other. Because of the memory loss, whenever Paul wore a watch, there was always a paranoid obsession in Anthony that he began to suspect Paul was wearing the watch that was stolen from him. When the two were left in the room, Anthony began to talk about his older daughter. He hadn't seen her for months. Paul wasn't being patient with him anymore. He asked Anthony how long would he stop annoying everyone. Anthony got nothing to say. That day, Anne took her father to the clinic. This scene happened before he was visited by Anne. His memory loss made a confusion out of the timeline. The clinic and Anne's house had the same structure. The doctor and Anthony had a conversation. He told the doctor he was born on December 31st, 1937. And that day is the main actor Anthony Hopkins' birthday. Let me put it another way. He played an old man of his own age who lost his memory. It was obvious that his answer wasn't right. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's syndrome. Anne wanted to keep it from her father, but their conversation was clearly heard by Anthony. That day, Anne came to the store to buy groceries. As a result, she received a call from her husband, telling her to go home immediately. Her father couldn't wear a sweater on his own. He was struggling. He heard Paul and Anne arguing. Do you want to send him to a nursing home? For all that, he still pretended to sit down and eat as if nothing had happened. But Paul didn't want to pretend that nothing happened. He wanted to have a word with Anthony. All these years, they took care of him, their relationship had gone low. It was obvious that there was a brick wall between them. The couple quarreled about Anthony again. Anne insisted that they took care of her father at home instead of sending him to a nursing home. That morning when Anthony woke up, the painting of his older daughter had gone. He turned and called for Anne, but he found Laura instead. Anthony had lost memories again. This scene happened in between. Laura took his morning medication, but he insisted against it. He didn't think he was old. Laura had to coax him like a child. It made him very embarrassed. At last, Anthony swallowed the medicine. He saw Paul standing behind Laura. When Laura left to give them space, Paul came up. To put it bluntly, Anthony ruined Anne's and his happy life. He slapped Anthony several times. Anthony cried helplessly. Anne ran from the kitchen when she heard his crying. Paul said dinner would be ready soon. Anthony was confused again. He asked Anne what time it was. It seemed that his memories were lost again. That was how the director did it. He was showing the audience what Alzheimer's syndrome did to the elderly. What happened this time finally led to the breakdown of Anne's marriage. At night, Anthony woke up from his sleep. He heard Anne calling his name. He went through the corridor and pushed open the door, but he had been in a hospital. The woman in the bed was seriously injured. It was his older daughter who died in an accident. This was Anthony's dream. When he got up, he wanted to open the door. There was only a locker behind it. It made him feel lost. Anne told him at breakfast the new caregiver would be here in a minute. In Anthony's memory, the girl looked like his older daughter, but it seemed that this person had changed in his mind. She looked like Anne instead. At some point, Alzheimer's syndrome could erode Anthony's memory, constantly putting the familiar face on a strange person he met. Anthony no longer distinguished what was wrong or right. This time, he saw a woman standing by the window. There was no caregiver to put up with his illness. Anne had to send him to a nursing home. The structure of the room was just like her house. There was only a window looking outside the garden, but there was a nurse standing by making him realize it wasn't her home. When he learned that Anne was going to leave for Paris, he was very sad. His Alzheimer's syndrome had become serious. Anthony realized there was nothing he could do about that. Anthony woke up thinking he was at home. Only the nurse who pushed in told him Anne had been here for months. She also showed him Anne's postcard from France. Now he suddenly realized in his lost memory, at one point, he mistook his daughter for a caregiver. The nurse said that when the daughter came to visit him, he and his daughter would go for a walk in the park. It was sad that Anthony couldn't remember all this. The doctor pushed open the door. In Anthony's memory loss, he mistook him as Paul. The memory of Paul flashed in his mind. With the aggravation of the disease, those who are most important to the elderly in their lives would have their faces imprinted in the patient's mind, making them confused. Anthony was going to forget his name. He cried like a child. He felt like a withered tree. The recollection of life was like the insight of fallen leaves. Finally, it came to nothing. The film is in the most intuitive way to show the insight view of an elderly with Alzheimer's syndrome. Everything in their eyes are confusing and illogical. It is the way they suffer. The film is also a call for people's care toward the elderly. Everyone will grow old in the end. Facing the last moment of life, I hope we can all remember that there are always people who care for us. That's all about this movie. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.